So, as Chuck mentioned, I'm Shannon Whetzel. I'm the curator here at the Cosmosphere. Just to give you a little background on myself, my bachelor's is in history, my master's is in public history with a focus on women's history and American foreign policy. So, I spend most of my time in the 1960s thinking about Gemini and Apollo. So, this is really great to get me out of, I wouldn't say my comfort zone, but my interest zone and learn more about the shuttle era. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I always enjoy these because I learn something new every single time. So today we're going to talk about Sally Ride. We called her the Cosmic Trailblazer because I refused to make the title Ride Sally Ride. We were tempted. I said no. It needs to be a little more less cliche, maybe. So Sally Ride was born May 26, 1951. She was an American astronaut and a physicist. She was the first American woman to fly in space. Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space, and we'll talk a little bit about her later. I guess I should say, while the focus of this is really Sally Ride, we're also going to talk about Valentina Tereshkova and Svetlana Savitskaya because they were actually the first two women in space. Really, we're just going to talk about women. Sally Ride was also the youngest astronaut. She flew at the age of 32. She joined NASA in 1978 when she was only 27, and she flew on STS-7. So technically she was also, let me think, she was the third woman to fly in space. And at one point she was literally the most famous person in America. So there she is on her flight. And then I like to start with this political cartoon because I think it really sums up this whole program. That when Sally passed in 2012, there's the daughter saying, wait, you're saying there was a time when there weren't women astronauts. I think we kind of take that for granted now, but the things that Sally had to go through were pretty rough, and she was pretty tough to be the first female astronaut. I also think that she kind of would have liked this because she didn't necessarily enjoy being known as the first female astronaut or first American. Before we get too far, I'm going to go in order here. So Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space. She flew 61 years ago this June. She's 87 years old. She was born in 1937. She is still living. She actually is part of the Russian Duma. She's a politician now. And I wouldn't cross her personally, but she was born on a collective farm 200 miles from Moscow. She was chosen in the first round of women cosmonauts. She also became extremely famous. She won a lot of awards. Like I said, she holds political office now. She represented the Soviet Union abroad. You know, she's a national treasure for them. So I could go, I think I did a program about Valentina, so I could go on and on about her as well. You know, the Russians picked the first woman. It was in their very early space program. More or less she was picked. They decided to fly a woman because of their, they were saying communism is more equal than capitalism. You know, we treat our women like we treat men. We're about equality, about all of that. And I think that the stats kind of show that she was more of a, PR thing because to date, or I think my date is May 2023, there's only been 5 Russian women to go to space, whereas there's been 56 US women. So I don't, was it a stunt or was it more about getting women in space? Anyway, I could go on and on about that. Let's look at some pictures of her. So here she is with Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space ever. I like that one. Here she is. This is how you know you've made it. I'll say that several times because I'll tell you how Sally Ride made it later. You get to feed a tiger cub at a zoo in Berlin. So there she is feeding a tiger cub. She became like an ambassador for the Soviet Union for visiting astronauts. So here she is with Neil Armstrong. He came to watch a Soyuz launch. And as I mentioned, she is currently a member of the Russian State Duma. So she was first. Now let's start with Sally. This is a picture of near Santa Ana, California. Why would I pick that? That's weird. Because I pulled this off of something we're going to talk about later. Sally Ride, especially later on, dedicated herself to education. And they have this thing called the Earth Cam project that Sally Ride started. So this is a picture of her hometown from the Earth Cam. It's close to where she was born. She had a very normal childhood, she would say. She was described as a pint-sized dynamo. She was introverted in school and a gifted tennis player. You can see she almost went pro. She found her love of tennis. Her tennis instructors also described her as difficult to control. Man, she's got all the good ones. She did have some thoughts of going pro in tennis, and she probably could have. Her tennis skills led to a prestigious prep school, Westlake School for Girls. She found her love of physics there, specifically astrophysics, which some of you may know the difference between those two. She honed her tennis skills. It was considered later on when she became an astronaut that this was where she learned self-control, self-discipline, and keeping a cool head, whether you're winning by a lot or losing by a lot. She headed east for college, but she was a California girl and couldn't handle it. So she came back west and went to Stanford. She joined the tennis team, but physics was her first love. Now, Stanford at the time was known for its physics program with a little asterisk here for men. She was the only female physics major in her class. There were no women teachers in physics, and the doctoral candidates for women were roughly 3%, so not very many. In fact, yeah, I'll say that here. In fact, not to Sally personally, but there's a story there that one of the few other female physics majors from years before was verbally abused by one of the professors who said, "What are you doing here? You're taking jobs away from men." Ouch. It'd be hard to keep going after that. Her classmates said that honestly, it started out as weird having a girl in class, but really it wasn't a problem for Sally. Sally had an unstated demand to be treated equally. And she was actually very personable, so you just liked her. She spent 8 years at Stanford. In 1973, she got a BS in physics and then a bachelor's in English lit. So she not only double majored, but it was a really weird double major. I think that at one point, she did think about writing her dissertation on something like how the views of physics or planetary whatever, how that influenced Shakespeare or something like that. So I don't think she did it, but she thought about it. She had finished her master's, working on her doctorate when, as this book says, this is the book I use for a lot of this. I'm receiving no financing to plug this book. It just was really good. When her future fell in her lap. NASA to recruit women. This was January 1977. So they were recruiting women and scientists, not just, I'm focusing on women, but really at this time, the astronaut candidates were becoming much more diverse at that time. We're going to take scientists, not just test pilots. So specifically, she would be applying for the mission specialist position. They were looking for scientifically trained individuals, not test pilots. Not just women, but scientists. I got ahead of my notes. So 2 weeks after seeing the article, she mailed her application to Johnson Space Center, and the decision was going to be made in December. Now I'm going to throw some numbers at you. 8,079 candidates applied. It was weeded down to about 5,000. After checking references, it was narrowed down to 200, which included 21 women. And then they were invited to Houston for the next step. So after the interviews, the medical tests, the psychological exams, 24 hours of urine collection, they sent them home and said, we'll let you know. The notes from her interviews state that she was considered young. She didn't have a lot of experience, but she had a lot of potential. It was very important to the people making those decisions that you could work well with others. And they felt that her tennis experience had really made her, able to work with other people well. Another interesting thing about the interview process was that the male candidates were asked, would you be okay flying with a woman? Because, you're going to have to work together, so we need to know now if there's a problem. One of them stated, I would fly with little green men if it meant I got to go to space. So I think they all shared that in common, that they were very passionate about going to space. This is the class of, they were called the TFNGs, the 35 new guys. It included 6 women. It was the first new astronaut class in 10 years. So before this, it was the Apollo guys. Kind of think of it like that. So they reported to JSC, and this is the 6 women. At the time, Johnson Space Center, JSC, had 4,000 technical employees. 4 were women. So I did the math. I attempted to do the math. I get kind of weird on percents once you start talking about 0.00, but 0.001% of NASA's staff were women at that time. That would be a bit awkward. Oh, okay. So, and here's Johnson Space Center. This is a more current picture. So they were not pilots or from the military, so they had to go through water safety training. And I think that this is when the 6 women began to realize what they were up against as being the first female candidates. The press had been alerted, and it was a mess. The men were very happy to just be invisible because there was so much focus on the women. When Sally was being hoisted back up into the helicopter, a photographer asked her to give him a happy look. That's what you want to do when you're soaking wet coming out of the water. I would not have been very happy, so it would have been a fake look. Yeah, and here they are at the training. It's a great photo. Yeah, so I think I have a video next. I lied. This is the second test. Can I get my video to work?
Back to Sally, that she wasn't comfortable. You mentioned that she wasn't comfortable necessarily with the media. About that. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I mean, she and I were alike. That neither of us suffer in the sense that neither of us suffer fools very graciously. And in particular, it started. Of course, the 6 women were unique, and I remember it was within a few weeks of our arrival in Houston that I think it was about 16 of us got sent off to water survival. We hadn't had it. A lot of the military mission specialists went through water survival. We got sent to an Air Force program in Florida. And there were NASA put out a press release saying we were going to be there, including the fact that women were going to be there, and so the press was there, hounding the. They ignored me, which was fine, but they were hounding the women, and every time they were going through some training exercise. There'd be people filming it. We were walking from one venue to another. Reporters would be running around shouting questions at them, and she didn't. She didn't really.
I mean, other people might have liked that sort of thing,
but Sally didn't.
I didn't either.
I didn't either, but I didn't have to deal
to
with
the
it
extent that she
to the
did.
extent that she did.
And of course, as
even more famous, and
by
of course,
as
as
seven, you know, there's even more attention and more dumb questions.
she became even more famous.
There's a famous
by being a
exchange. I
scientist
think
at
Lynn
7.
writes about it in her book.
There's even more attention and more dumb questions.
And if I remember the details properly,
there's a famous exchange. I think Lynn writes about it in
press
her
conference
book.
with the crew and some.
If I remember the details properly,
you know, when you're in the simulator and things,
press conference,
problems are happening,
some
do you cry?
reporter asked her,
And I
when
think
you're in the
Sally
simulator and
things,
I believe she
problems
said,
are
happening, do
why
you
doesn't
cry?
anybody ever ask Rick that question?
And I think Sally paused for a second, and then I believe she said,
Crip said,
why doesn't anybody ever ask
Commander
Rick that
cries.
question? Meaning Rick Houck, the pilot.
That's one of my
then Crip
favorite
said,
stories.
the commander
and I
cries.
think
But, you know, that was, you know, she
that's one of my favorite
subjected to a lot
stories.
of
And
that,
I think
But, you know, that was, you know,
questioning.
she
and
was subjected to a lot of that.
I mean, you
sort
could,
of stupid
you know, a lot of ways you
questioning.
could deal with it, but she,
And,
you know,
I mean, you
didn't
could,
make
you know, a
any
lot of
secret
ways
of
you
the
could
fact
deal
that
with
she
it,
thought
but
these guys were idiots.
She didn't make any secret of the fact that she thought these guys were idiots.
And I was so excited to get my video to work that I should have probably introduced that better. That was Mimi, our former vice president of development. Thank you. I knew that. Vice president of development, doing an interview with Steve Hawley, who was one of the 35 new guys. And also he was married to Sally Ride briefly for a couple of years. So he has a lot of insight, and we were very lucky that he sat for that interview. And he's a friend of the Cosmosphere. So he is a Kansas astronaut. That's for another program. Okay, so yeah, the water training was awful, or at least the way the press treated them. But more importantly to Sally was her astronaut training. And during her training, she became an expert in the remote, let me look at this, remote manipulator system. I'm going to call it the robot arm. In the robot arm that was used to deploy satellites. It was, I guess using arm is kind of misleading because it was 50 feet long and here on Earth weighed 900 pounds. So it's a big arm if you mess up something. She also learned to fly, which is pretty cool. And due to her expertise with the robot arm, she was chosen to be Capcom on STS-2 and STS-3. Pretty cool. These are during trainings, but so let me go to my next slide. So she did fly, her first flight was STS-7. Now, no one knows exactly how astronauts are picked, but if you're Capcom, it's a pretty good indication you're going to fly. So she had her expertise in the robot arm. She had the fact that she was Capcom twice going for her. So needless to say, she was chosen on STS-7, which was the first flight to include a female astronaut. She was told on April 19th, 1982. Chosen because of her skills with the robot arm, because she worked well with others. That was a big deal to NASA, which I was not, I mean, it's obvious when you think about it, but makes me think, I don't know if I'd be chosen to be an astronaut. I feel like I work okay with other people, but she apparently worked really well with others. The crew stuck together in space, but also trained together for a year. So you gotta like each other, or at least be able to tolerate each other. Also, the fact that she had proved while she was Capcom that she could be very calm in situations. Okay. So here's the crew photo, but I want to tell this story. Most of the time, the crew was told together. You get the call, you come in, you all sit down, and you're like, oh my gosh, are we going to go to space? She was pulled in separately and was basically asked, do you think you can handle this? Because it's going to be rough being the first woman in space. Chris Kraft, who was head of the, was it still called the Johnson Space Center? He was, or he might have been head of it. Anyway, Chris Kraft, so you'll remember him from the Apollo years. He started mission control. he wanted to make sure she knew what she was getting into, and more or less said, let us know what you need and we'll do what we can. No question was too invasive. She dealt with some pretty crazy questions. This one isn't crazy, but how does it feel to be the first woman astronaut? Okay, she got that one like a million times. How does it feel to be asked that question so many times? I'm sure she couldn't give her true feelings on that. During the training, she was somewhat protected because she was so busy, especially like her robot arm stuff. She flew up to Canada and would work, 15-hour days every day. So during training, it wasn't quite as bad. I do want to, as I'm trying to go chronologically, so America is going to send their first woman into space, right? It's very exciting. Well, the Soviet Union says, you know what? We haven't flown a woman in a while. So they send up Svetlana Savitskaya. Not that she wasn't extremely qualified. She was an extremely qualified, I'm trying to think. She was a pilot, I believe. The Soviet Union began recruiting women in 1979. So if I'm saying it right, NASA announced in 1977 that they were recruiting women. So in 1979, Soviet Union started doing it. She flew August of 1982, 10 months before Sally Ride. She was not only the second woman in space, though. She was the first woman to perform a spacewalk, which is pretty cool. Another cool story. This is a backstory. Svetlana and, I have some pictures too, sorry. So here she is performing her spacewalk. And here she is with her crewmates. She flew on Soyuz T-7 to the Salyut space station. So she went to a space station too, which is pretty cool. There was a secret meeting between Svetlana and Sally Ride. They were both in Budapest at a conference, and the US government said, Sally, you do not talk to those Soviets. And she said, okay. And then there was a secret meeting, and they got along great. And they talked about their shared experiences, not just in space, but as being the only woman on a crew in space and all the weird things that happened, I'm sure. So she didn't talk about it after that secret meeting. Anyway, back to STS-7. Sally Ride launched. Sally Ride and the rest of the guys, I think is one of the signs they said, launched on June 18th, 1983. There were immediately 500 requests for an interview with her. She was asked how the crew and how she felt about being the first woman in space. And she said, I don't care about being first. I want to be good. And I think there's a video that's coming up with Steve Hawley. I've got little clips, but good, bad, or indifferent, she knew that whatever she did in space would be reflected on all the women who came after her. She received telegrams. This is how you know you've made it. Telegrams, which the old-fashioned tweet, from Sandra Day O'Connor. Okay, cool. Miss Piggy. You know it when Miss Piggy sends you a telegram. She described the launch, Sally Ride, not Miss Piggy, described the launch as exhilarating, terrifying, and overwhelming all at once. There's that picture again. She helped deploy satellites. The mission went well. When asked about it, she said, quote, I'm sure it was the most fun I'll ever have in my life. There's another good one. So she also was chosen to fly on STS-41G in October of 1984. This was the first mission to include 2 women. Kathy Sullivan joined Sally Ride. Oh no, I thought I forgot my third page. So here's some photos from the mission. Oh, wait, let me go back. Okay. So she was actually scheduled to fly again in July of 1986. Remember, this is the early shuttle era where we're talking about, hey, we have this space plane. We can go up whenever we want. We're going to have lots of missions. So the schedule was pretty thick there. She was scheduled to fly again in 1986, but Challenger exploded. There were 4 of the 35 new guys on Challenger. So 4 of her class died in that flight. Part of that, or post Challenger, they created the Rogers Commission, which Sally was on. So she helped provide the report as to what went wrong, what can do better, what can we do better, all that stuff. And then following the report, she moved to DC to work at NASA headquarters. So she did that for a while. And then later she went back to academia. She started teaching. They called her away from that, again, unfortunately, to participate in the Columbia Accident Investigation Board after Columbia exploded in February of 2003. This is her badge that's in the Smithsonian collection. And as I always say, if the Muppets are messaging you, or if you're meeting with Muppets, you've made it. So here she is. I didn't come to NASA to make history. She was uncomfortable with the press and publicity, but as her career went along, she realized that she could get into things that were more about education and use her name for those purposes. Especially, I think, I'm getting ahead of myself, but she was really, one of her goals was to get more girls into what we now call STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. So she started speaking, she started creating things, like she helped start what's called KidSat, which is now that Earth Cam where I pulled that photo from. Actually, now it's the Sally Ride Earth Cam, which is NASA educational outreach initiated by Sally Ride. Sounds like I pulled this off their website, doesn't it? Initiated by Sally Ride. The purpose is to educate middle school students about Earth from the unique perspective of space. So here's another picture. I wanted to get Hutchinson. They did not have Hutchinson. Exactly. So this is Halstead. From the Earth Cam, and then 20 years ago, she and her partner Tam started Sally Ride Science, which was the purpose to narrow the gender gap in science and engineering. Okay, I don't want to do this video yet. Okay, so Sally was a very private person. And in 2012, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Most of her close friends didn't even know. And so she passed fairly quickly, and it was a shock to not only some people who were close to her, but also the nation in general. So let me start this video, because this is a good one.
What do you think maybe we should reflect on and
What do
know,
you think
and remember
maybe we should
about her?
reflect
what's
on
the most
and
important
know
thing? And remember about
Let me
her.
say
What's
first
the most important
that,
thing?
Let me say first that
The TFNG class,
I think the
ended
TFNG
up sort of
class
defining the shuttle generation.
ended up sort of defining
when we
the
showed
shuttle
up, we were not,
generation.
we were the new guys.
When we
There were
showed
still
up, we
some
were not,
Apollo guys
we were the new
around,
guys, and there were
and
still
they
some
flew
Apollo guys around.
the first flights,
and they
but
flew the
it
first
wasn't
flights.
too long
But
before,
it wasn't too
the
long
TFNGs
before,
were
the
basically
TFNGs
running
were
the show in the astronaut
basically running the show
office.
in the astronaut office.
And I'm really proud of that. I do take a lot of pride on behalf of all of us that,
on behalf of all of us that
I'd like to think we sort of formed the
I'd
shuttle
like to think
generation.
we sort of formed the shuttle generation.
Specifically in Sally's case,
of
course, she set the precedent
that
a woman astronaut can do anything
a woman
that
astronaut can
male
do
astronaut
anything
can
that
do.
a male astronaut can do.
But I think maybe, particularly 45 years,
particularly
later,
45 years
from the time
later,
picked, 40
from the time we were
years from
picked,
the time
40
she flew,
years from the time she flew.
people may not
May
have
not
known or remember,
have known or remember
how much pressure she was under.
much pressure she was under.
There's no doubt that she
knew that
whatever she did, good, bad,
whatever
or
she did,
indifferent,
good, bad, or indifferent,
was going to reflect on
was going to reflect on
all of the women to come.
all of the women to come.
And that was
And
pre-flight,
that was
it was
pre-flight,
in-flight,
it was
and
in
it
flight,
after the
and
flight.
it was after the flight.
And I can
I
tell you for sure that I know how much pressure she was under in all of those
different
phases. I think the flight
phases. I think the
itself
flight
was
itself
probably
was
the
probably
easiest for
the
her.
easiest for her.
She was confident that she could do the job.
She could do the job she was assigned.
And now people were leaving her alone.
Just let her do it.
To just let her do it. So that was a bit of a relief. From all of the pre-flight stress that she was under, and carrying this responsibility that in hindsight people may not have appreciated that stress that she was under,
and carrying
that she did it.
Responsibility that in hindsight she was under, and that she did it.
Oh, and then I have this QR code if you're interested in watching the whole interview. It was fantastic. So in 2013, she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which was received by her partner, Tam, her partner of 27 years. So she was at least acknowledged after her death. Not that she wasn't acknowledged before, but you know what I mean. So yeah, that's it. Are there any questions about Sally Ride? I can get into the bathroom stuff if you want. I don't know. I'm trying to keep this tasteful, but we can talk about it. You want me to talk about it? Okay. No one's asked questions? Yes. How long was she married to Steve? I think it was about 2 years. Not long. And it was while they were training. I don't know that, I think if she did officially marry Tam, it wouldn't have been until very later, 2010-ish. I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure. How many missions did she fly? She officially flew 2 and was scheduled for a 3rd when Challenger happened. Yes. What is the percent? Oh, that's a good question. Oh, those math ones. The percentage of women astronauts. I think I said there's 56 US. I don't know. Chuck looks like he might be Googling. Michelle might be Googling. Who's faster? 15? Oh, no, you're just raising your. %11 of the world's astronauts. So that includes, I believe there was a Saudi Arabian woman who flew. I'm trying to think of who else. Anyway, so that's not just America and Russia. That's everybody. Yes, I think, was it May 2023? That's the latest I could find. Okay. Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, that's much better than 4 people, not percent, which was 0.001%. Anything else? Yes. Is Is Steve still teaching? I don't think so. I think he retired. Yeah. Yeah. Which means he can come here more, right? Yeah. All right. Well, that just means that I covered everything. Oh, did you have a question? On our board, no. But he should be. We'll invite him. You and me. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.